Thumbnail, they removed this verse. Title, this will make you think differently about Catholicism. 700,000 views. Oh boy. I sure hope Ray Comfort didn't bear false witness in front of almost 1 million people. So what verse is Ray Comfort referring to?
Do you remember the Catechism, the Ten Commandments?
Yes.
The Catholic Catechism actually skips over the second commandment. They took it out and they divided the 10th. The second commandment, if you look at Exodus 20, first is, I am the Lord your God, you shall have no other gods before me. The second is, you shall not make yourself a graven image of any likeness. Anything on the earth, under the earth, or in heaven, or in the sea, you shall not bow down to them. That one's disappeared from the Catholic Catechism and they split the 10th, so there's still 10 in there. So when I ask a Catholic, what's the second commandment? They say, you shall not take God's name in vain, which is the third, because they don't know the second is missing.
So the Catechism skipped over the second commandment and divided the 10th. This verse about not making graven images disappeared from the Catholic Catechism. Did the Catholic Church remove this verse? Let's look at the Catholic Bible. In the Revised Standard Version, Second Catholic Edition, Exodus chapter 20, verse... Wait, what? It's not here. Ray Comfort is right. Oh, never mind. Here it is. Verse 4, you shall not make for yourself a graven image. Great job removing the verse, you Catholics. You forgot to remove it from your Bibles, which is the most important place. Oh, you know he meant the Catechism and not the Bible. Okay, but it's still wrong and extremely misleading to say that the Church removed the verse when the verse is literally here, right? But let's look at the Catechism then. In section 2, which is about the 10 Commandments, Article 1, heading number 4, it says, you shall not make for yourself a graven image. Okay, so the Catholic Bible and the Catechism did not remove the verse. You do realize that I can actually end the video right now, right? His main argument was refuted by quite literally just opening the Bible and the Catechism. There is not a lot of arguments where the most difficult part in refuting it is just being able to get to the right page number. So how might Ray Comfort respond? He might say, okay, fine, the Catholic Church did not remove the verse completely, but you still removed it in the Catechism in the sense that it is not one of the 10 Commandments. Well, that is wrong as well. Not making graven images is a subsection of the first commandment in the Catechism, so it is still part of the 10 Commandments. It is just part of the first one. Now Ray Comfort might say, okay, fine, but you Catholics still break that commandment nevertheless. And why didn't you make this a separate commandment? Why did you include this with the first one? Well, the first point is rather simple to answer. Exodus chapter 20 verse 4 says that you should not make a graven image of anything in heaven, on earth, or under the earth. And yet in Exodus 25:18-19, God commanded people to make statues of angels. And in Numbers 21 verses 8-9, God commanded Moses to make a graven image of a serpent. So did God command his people to break the commandments? Was Moses caught in the middle of a catch-22 situation? If he obeys God's commandment of not making graven images, then he must disobey God commanding him to make a graven image. Or he must obey God commanding him to make a graven image and disobey God's commandment to not make graven images. So God was like, Moses, make this graven image. And then Moses was like, okay, sure thing. Wait a second. You're trying to trick me, right? Yeah, so clearly we need to retrace our steps and ask what it means for God to prohibit people from making graven images. And Exodus chapter 20 verse 3 makes clear that it is in the context of idolatry. We should not make graven images for idolatrous reasons. So now the question is, do Catholics make statues for idolatrous reasons? Do Catholics turn saints and angels into God? Do Catholics consider statues and images of Jesus to be actually Jesus? No, no, and no. Idolatry is based on what is happening in your heart. If you bow down before a statue, because your intention is to worship the statue itself as God, it is idolatry. But if you bow down before a statue to honor the reality it represents, that is not idolatry. And if I say that I am not idolatrous, but you insist that I am, you are making yourself God because you are claiming to know my intentions and dispositions. You are slandering people and bearing false witness against them by labeling them as idolaters. So think about that the next time you hear this argument. The Catechism explains very well the veneration of images. The Christian veneration of images is not contrary to the first commandment, which prescribes idols. Indeed, the honor rendered to an image passes to its prototype, and whoever venerates an image venerates the person portrayed in it. The honor paid to sacred images is a respectful veneration, not the adoration due to God alone. Religious worship is not directed to images in themselves, considered as mere things, but under their distinctive aspect as images leading us on to God incarnate. The movement toward the image does not terminate in it as image, but tends toward that whose image it is. So venerating an image is not directed at the image itself. The veneration is to the person portrayed in the image. And now for the second question, which I personally find the most interesting. Why do people dispute what exactly the 10 individual commandments are? The main reason is because the Bible doesn't actually tell us which ones are the first, second, third, and so on. Exodus 20 verses 3 to 5 make clear that it is in the context of idolatry that we should not make graven images. Verse 3 says that we should not have other gods. Verse 4 says no graven images. Verse 5 says don't bow down to or serve these images. This is why the Catholic Church sees this as one commandment. Don't serve other gods. Don't be guilty of idolatry. Turning this into two separate commandments doesn't make much sense. Otherwise, the second commandment is just repeating the first commandment in a more limited sense. The Catholic order makes much more sense. Graven images is a subcategory being condemned, due to it being idolatry. And by the way, this is not even a Catholic versus Protestant debate. Martin Luther and Lutherans agree with the Catholic order of the first few commandments. I wonder if Ray Comfort will accuse them of removing the verse as well, and that Martin Luther and Lutherans are idolaters who make graven images. Catholics also make a distinction between the commandments that prohibit coveting your neighbor's property and your neighbor's wife, because a wife is not your property, and this correlates very well with God gradually revealing truth to his people, because later in Deuteronomy chapter 5, when the 10 commandments are repeated, verse 21 makes an explicit distinction between not coveting your neighbor's wife versus not desiring your neighbor's property. God revealed that a wife is not just some material good like a man's property. So clearly, Saint Augustine, who was the driving force behind the Catholic order of the 10 Commandments, had the right idea. Thank you for watching today's video. God bless.